Welcome to the Business Women Australia podcast show, the podcast that brings together industry leaders to discuss the latest trends, insights and strategies. So sit back and relax, let's get inspired by the amazing women who are shaping the future of professional women in Australia. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
And welcome to today's episode of the Business Women Australia podcast show. I'm the National Director and Founder of Business Women Australia, Lyn Hawkins, and I'd like to pay respects to our traditional owners all around this gorgeous country, past, present, and those emerging, many of whom we are working with across different industries and sectors. And I'd like to just acknowledge how they've cared for the land and teaching us about our cultural history and our heritage, the longest living heritage of cultural history in the world, and very proud to be a part of Australia and a part of the world of our First Nations people. I'm very excited today as we are streaming live across LinkedIn, YouTube, and we managed to hold on to our Facebook destination as well. We often drop that for some reason, but I have the very talented guest on our show, Erin Clark. She's the director of TEC Group or TEC Group and a trusted advisor to leaders in complex, asset-heavy and project-driven organisations. And we're going to delve beyond the report and investigate what consultants won't tell you, because Erin and I both have a belief that traditional consulting is more than broken. Welcome to the show, Erin.
Thanks for having me, Lyn.
Look, I've had you on this show a few years ago and we go back a long way, but a lot has changed actually. Now, we're very much focused on the types of organisations that really power the nation. It's a great topic, especially for leaders who rely on consultants or suspect that they might need to be getting some consultants in to work with them. We're going to unlock how to get the most out of technical specialists, out of these knowledge experts and those who are going to be key players during critical times of change. And sort of if you're in the audience and listening to this, if you're dealing with process tangles, with political complexity, unclear decision rights or system pain points, we're going to walk you, our listeners, through a clearer sense of what good advisory looks like and how to avoid the traps that are holding organisations back. Erin, I love your passion to fix what's broken in consulting. I've been in and out of consulting for a long time, since my early days in the 90s, dare I say it, with KPMG. Now you're this director of TEC or TEC Group. You're a trusted advisor and you are drawing on very deep experience across technology, infrastructure and strategic transformation. You span a systems and org design mindset and experience and frameworks, and you're a portfolio and program governance expert. You're an expert and deep knowledge in product thinking and the practical realities of delivering tech-enabled change in large, multi-layered organisations. So I would really like to dive in, Erin, and really pick your brains today. You've said that traditional consulting models are broken. Tell us, what do you see are the key flaws of how consultancies have been engaging with complex organisations? Let's really unpack where the problems lie.
Thanks, Lyn. For a long time, when people engage consultants, there's a usual pattern that they tend to follow when they engage. They tend to focus a lot on getting strategy type reports, so big documents. I think a lot of us who have worked in the professional space for a long time is very familiar with 100, 200-page report. It looks fantastic, graphically beautiful, but can be really difficult to implement. And particularly those report or output-driven type deliverables that management consultants are typically engaged for. A lot of organisations are now finding that they can get similar types of outputs from using generative AI. And there's been a lot of scandals lately where organisations have quite a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars, for reports only to find out that the consultants themselves, very high-profile organisations, are using generative AI for that as well. So the reports are no longer fit for purpose. Why pay millions of dollars when you can use your own instance as well that probably knows more about you and your organisation than a consultant might? One of the other ways that consultants are typically engaged is to build something. So whether it's a framework or a system or those types of things. And I've seen lots of great examples, and I'm sure you have, Lyn, too, where a consultancy is being engaged and they've actually built a beautiful product, a fantastic product, whether it's a system or a framework. But what they've done is they've copied the last organisation, and we've all seen them. They've still got the previous organisation's name still in them, and they're not fit for purpose. So they've taken something from a different organisation, different industry, different size, different culture, and then expected the client to shoehorn that system or that framework in. So what they're doing is, rather than designing it for the client in mind, they're just banging it in and making it really hard and expecting the client to do all of the organisational change associated with it. And the third one, so we've talked about reports and we've talked about building things, and even advisory, I think, is changing a lot too, because when we think about the types of people who come through consultancies, a lot of them have never, to use Brené's Brown word, had their face down in the arena. So it's very easy for them to come in and talk about best practice and give advice, but it might not necessarily be somebody who has had industry experience or can think about what things happen in the real world. They can tell you about the textbook, but their advice isn't necessarily grounded in real world lived experience.
Yeah, even if it is grounded in evidence-based research out of university systems or the latest leadership techniques, it's generally by the time that we get it from, sort of a knowledge building point of view, there's only bits and pieces that's relevant for our own organisations. And it really ties into this concept of building from within and co-design. Erin, you and I often are very focused on how do we go about really impacting change and walking people through change so they get the expertise from within as well. And it is such a big issue, and it's a lot of wastage going on. And there's a lot of boards that are bogged down by these reports and thinking that, well, at least there's, been, a brand that they trust, associated with this document that's been produced, that's been presented. It feels like there's movement, but really they're kind of, they're none the wiser. As you say, you can get these reports through fantastic models of AI systems. And we've been seeing a lot of that. That's a great place to start, but it's better done from within the organisation anyway, and owning that. So this technology is really changing the game. It really is. And, we've had the ERP systems, we've got enterprise asset management. These digital transformations are creating both challenges and opportunities for organisations and for consultants alike. Tell us your thoughts on that.
I start with organisations like ERP, so those really large systems that you see in organisations. So whether it's your finance system, so in large complex organisations, you can quite often have a system which is you've got your financials, your people or your HR information, your assets information, and they can all be connected quite tightly or connected loosely. So what you're seeing in larger organisations is they've got these legacy systems that they've invested a lot in over the years that no longer serve them. So there's lots of challenges there for organisations where these are really typically difficult to change once you, because of their complexity and because they hold a lot of organisational knowledge that has been built up over time. But what I've experienced a lot working with organisations is they become really fixated on the system. So we've got this system and it's this old and it's an end of life and it needs to be replaced and it's got this and it's got that. And most of these conversations I find when I have with organisations, we start by talking about the systems, what's wrong with the system, rather than thinking more holistically. Yes, it might be a cybersecurity risk. Yes, the vendor might not support it. Yes, it might be really expensive to upgrade. But I just see organisations so much becoming really fixated on the software and what software they're using and replacing. And when we're talking about ERP programs, we're looking at between anything from 10 to 100 mil. So we're talking quite significant IT investments. And I know, Lyn, you've been involved with marketing software back in the day. We get really fixated on the software and what that does. And so the flip side then is what for organisations is really, rather than say, yes, you might need to replace something, but rather than thinking about that business case just in the context of the software and its features, is thinking, what is the organisational capability that we need that we don't have? What is it that our people, what is it that we can do from a process point of view? And thinking about how the technology supports that rather than drives that.
Yeah, it's really getting out of the sort of detail and stepping back into strategy, into organisation. Where are we? Who are we going to be? What's our purpose and what's going to be needed of us in the future? Otherwise, it just becomes more of the same.
Yeah. And I think what you also asked, Lyn, was what does that mean for consultants? One of the trends that I'm finding really interesting at the moment in the spaces that I'm in is consultants are becoming more and more specialised. I think, when we think about, the careers, their journeys that we've had, and I think, I wrote by before, I was like, oh, heck, I have been involved in all of these weird and wonderful the course of my journey, is I'm across consultants who are very hyper specialized. And so that makes it really difficult when you're solving problems, because you've only got one beautiful toolbox to draw in that might be quite deep, rather than having a diversity of skills and experiences that you can draw on for problem solving. So the challenge for consultants, I think, is as the technology, it's kind of this weird inverse relationship, which is as the technology becomes more and more complex, what we need as consultants is to become more generalist and understand the intersection between people, process, and technology, rather than just specialising in one of those areas.
Yeah, that really does have implications for consultants, and to be able to see more of the strategic overview and how everything connects, and not to just come in, it can have a real domino impact on one area if something is fixed over here, and how it can have an impact on everything else in the organisation. So, if we go back to your business, I mean, I've seen your business evolving over the years, and you've recently rebranded from the Exchange Collective to TEC, or TEC. How do you say it? Is it TEC Group?
I clearly, this is a good story, because clearly I have a love of organisations that are hard to say and spell. So we call it TEC. And so the Exchange Collective was born over 6 years ago with myself and a fellow co-founder, where what we were really driven is wanting to see more diversity in innovation, because we thought that the best problems are solved with lots of different ways of thinking, ways of working. And so when we kicked the business off, there were two halves. There was, we were running innovation events. So you can see that started well before COVID. It's been a while, and probably because we love the BWA one so much. And the other half was consulting. What has since transpired is we've ended up with also, in addition to having the consulting work that we do, is we've been running our own startups as well. So TEC Group now includes several startups that I run with my co-founder. So we run Stories Unseen, which is self-guided walking and driving tours. And we also have May the Farm as well, where we experiment with, so it's an agri tourism business where we experiment with endemic bush tucker. And it's also a great way for us to prove our Internet of Things credentials, as we have very large scale retic monitoring, those types of things. So what running our startups and scale-ups in addition to consulting, and also doing a few other volunteer bits and pieces that we do as well, is it enables us to cycle through a really great group of trusted people that we work with. So it really has truly become a collective, because we've got, with the startup and scale-up businesses, we're proving to organisations that we can take something from an idea and get it onto the national and international stage, winning awards, raising revenue. So we practice what we preach. What it means is that we have great people that we test in our own businesses and cycle through our own businesses before we put them through and forward to our consulting clients as well. And what that model enables us to do is it keeps people fresh. Working in the startup and scale-up space, as well as the large corporate space, it gives them a taste for how quickly things can move in a smaller organisation, but also respecting larger organisations and why quite often they have the controls that they do have.
Yeah, it's a very clever model, and it's one that really resonates with me too. You know, I've always tried to, while working with corporates and professional firms, and what have you, still have, you know, my hands on tools and to be around people who are innovating, who are using the latest technologies, who are experimenting and exploring in order to be able to keep that systems thinking around applying what is going to be needed for these big organisations to pivot and stay real and to continue to meet the needs of their stakeholders. Now, we go back around that circle then and look at these organisations with complex asset and project environments. They're increasingly needing partners who can help them make real progress. I mean, you know, you've really highlighted the problems there around the reports and the juniors presenting, you know, big decks of information to them, and the AI summarising stuff they can do themselves. So how is TEC Group approaching this change in what clients expect and need?
So what we've been experimenting with clients recently is an embedded delivery model. So for these really complex problems, traditional consulting's usually, I've got a scope of works, it goes to my procurement team, I send it out to the usual suspects, and then they deliver in a particular way. As we spoke about, they're either delivering it as a report, they're building something, or they're providing a very niche type of advisory. The embedded delivery model that we've been experimenting with clients is it's not acting. So for those who are familiar with it's particularly common in the IT sector. They're a developer, an organisational change manager, a business analyst. For those in the SME space, they would be very familiar with fractional type roles. So you might have a chief marketing officer, a CFO, those types of senior leaders that you engage on a fractional basis, so only for a few days a week. What this embedded delivery model that we've been experimenting with enables us to do is bring forward a team of what we call specialist generalists. So people who have deep experience in asset-intensive environments, very, very large, complex project environments, but they're not hamstrung by wearing a particular title. So they're not there as a change manager, they're not there as a project manager, they're not there as a business analyst. They're there sitting embedded within client teams to solve problems collectively together. What that model also enables us to do is to have clients second team members to sit alongside our team. So as we're solving problems, not only just solving problems, we're building the client's capability as well, because they're sitting alongside team members who have deep experience in these industries. and bring a wealth of experience around the system side of things as well. A lot of that tacit, so that knowledge that doesn't usually get written down, it's a great way to build internal capability in a way that you couldn't send someone to a training course. You couldn't, it's not something that you could necessarily buy in. It's just something that happens organically.
These would be invariably fairly long-term engagements. If you're really embedding into the organisation, you've got that knowledge transfer and the co-design, the both ways of communication that's needed. It certainly sounds like an extraordinarily powerful impact that can be made internally, and it certainly answers a lot of questions that leaders across these complex organisations are grappling with in terms of how, when they know that their own teams are busy doing day-to-day operations and meeting the needs of their current roles, but actually embedding yourself into the organisation is extraordinarily impactful. So I love this approach. It's a way that as a fractional specialist I've worked too, so it really makes sense to me. And then leaving an organisation with strong capabilities and, you know, future pathways for their own teams to own the change and to then continue growing. They're going to not hesitate getting you back for the next embedded requirement that they might need. Erin, look, we both share this passion for building communities of talented women. You know, within these kinds of industries, how do you see the diversity influencing the way that consulting evolves and the outcomes we can generate, and perhaps the impact on leadership culture in general? And there's a few layers to that question, so take your time thinking about that one.
I think one of the things that I'm really curious about at the moment is there's an assumption in the consulting industry that the clients that we engage with are the same people they've always been. So they've always been senior leaders, and I think we all know the cliche of, you know, they ride their bikes wearing lycra on the weekend, and so that's a known industry. You roll in with your RM William boots, and we're initially besties because all of those signs and symbols that we're used to. I'm really fascinated by is that the consulting industry kind of forgotten that clients have changed. So when I look at the BWA and the types of women that now hold senior leadership positions, I'm really fascinated by who's there to support them and offer them advice, because a lot of the consultants that I see when I'm engaging with clients haven't changed their model. They're still assuming that the client on the other side is the same type of leader. And I don't mean just gender. We mean cultural background, educational background, all types of different life experiences. And as we're starting to see greater diversity in the workforce, we're not necessarily seeing that same diversity reflected in the consulting community. And I think you touched on, Lyn, what does that mean from a leadership perspective? Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, absolutely. Very interested in how this then, you know, shapes leadership.
It's really interesting because I think we always think, let's look at me. The things I've learned from BWA is never to use we, only to use I, which is
we
great.
Use we sometimes.
But it's great, you know, as a consultant, it's quite fascinating because that switch to I really does help build your relationship as a trusted advisor. Because then you're starting to talk about my experience, I've seen this, and it holds space for clients then to say my experience has been difficult and different, and you can start to drill into that. And what sits behind that when we're talking about leadership is getting away from this idea that leadership is a position, and that has been quite pervasive for a long time, that, you know, leaders sit in hierarchies, and all of the things that we attach to that status, a particular way of thinking, a particular way of working. And that idea of leadership being just about a place that someone holds in a hierarchy, I think, is being substantial. We start to see more and more people, particularly women, move more and more into the concept of a portfolio career, because we need to completely think what leadership is. In a portfolio career, leadership is not a position you hold in an organisation, and there's so many people who take their identity from where they sit in an organisational hierarchy. What does it mean when you have a portfolio career? What does leadership then look like and mean?
Yeah, it's a real journey of learning. I've personally unlearning a lot of things that I held dear to my heart around my input and my role as a leader, and how I advise and shape the way things happen, to actually letting go of a lot of that as I've learned what it is to be more of a conscious leader. And even just recently going to Adelaide and hosting and facilitating an extraordinary group of women in the property and development sector around a roundtable there, and then in Melbourne on Friday hosting the boardroom Q&A with Andrea Durant. And Andrea was saying that the requirements even around chairs of boards, to not be the ones coming up with the answers, to be the ones to really hold that silence in the room, to allow, you know, that to settle, and for different brains and different voices to emerge in the conversation, and to not be the ones to necessarily be telling everyone what needs to be done. And this is a massive shift in our concept of management, you know, that's come out of the original military style and traditional programs around management and leadership, certainly that I grew up with out of, you know, the university system and the Harvard system, and to being able to shape more of, I think, the qualities that come from a lot of the women that I'm around, and learning from them in terms of nurturing others and allowing things to emerge. It just creates so much more diversity in the room for thinking. No longer do we want everyone to be like-minded. We want that diversity in thinking. So the practice that we have around these conscious communication principles that we're often, you know, relying on even in the way we're talking now, and Erin, it's just so needed in today. So it's great that you actually highlighted that in terms of the leadership and how it's shaping and changing in order for better outcomes for organisations and for the world generally. So in your experience, how can leaders in asset and project-heavy organisations approach collaboration and problem solving differently to get these better outcomes?
I think we've touched on in that standard model in those types of industries is to write a scope of work, send it off to your usual suspects, and off you go. But there's lots of different ways to put your toe in and test whether a consultant is the right fit for you without, you know, we spoke about an embedded model. That takes a lot of trust to get to that space. So what I would always recommend when engaging consultants is to find something small that you can work on together and test that it's a good fit for both organisations before you move to some of those more in-depth, more collaborative type models. Some of the things that I've found worked really well over the course of my practice is, and I often joke, if someone says, "What do you do?" I always say, "Oh, ERP rescues," because it's such a wicked problem, and it's the type of thing that if you've got a major ICT project that's gone off the rails, you just want to call someone to say, "Please help, come fix it." But inevitably, with those types of ones, for those who are familiar with the space, we always know that the minute you lift up the hood and have a look, that it's never a technology problem. It's usually an intersection of people and process. So yes, those come and fix something is always fun, because you can roll up your sleeves and get cracking straight away. But some of the other ways to engage consultants to test that you're a good fit, one of the ones I love is a maturity assessment. A maturity assessment is a really good way. So it's something that you can do for project management, portfolio management, asset management, financial management. So for those who are familiar with capability frameworks, God, they come back from the 70s, Lyn. Can you imagine that? Everything that's old is new again. That it came out of software engineering, and it's just been, now there's a framework for every industry, and it fascinates me. Why I love maturity assessments is they're a short, sharp way to have conversations about, for a particular space, where are we, where do we want to be? And then that gives a really measurable way to talk about how do we get from where we are to where we want to be. So I absolutely love a maturity framework. And there's those types of engagements. A short, sharp maturity assessment can be done as quickly as a week. So it's a really nice way to test you, test ways of working. The other one is any kind of small pilot that has a co-design type component to it. So there might be something tricky from a process or technology point of view that your organisation's been grappling with. I find those types of challenges are fantastic, where you just need another set of eyes. As an organisation, you might be just hitting a wall, just can't break through. Is a very tightly defined problem statement. Come in and just focus on one little thing to see how we work together, and whether it's a good fit, again, to just keep solving more problems, or it's not the right time. So I do love a small pilot or co-design activity. The other one that I've done a lot of when I used to live out of a suitcase was a ideation sprint. So that's working with an organisation to crowdsource. So rather than coming in as a consultant and saying, hey, we're consultants, we're the experts in absolutely everything. And I think everyone makes a joke about consultants that, they take your watch to tell you the time, is to actually be upfront about that. And rather than say, hey, I'm a consultant, work with a team of beautiful consultants, is to do it as a crowdsourcing activity. So come into an organisation and hold space for team members to bubble up ideas to specific problems. So we talk a lot in BWA about creating containers. Crowdsourcing is a great way to create containers, particularly with people who are on the tools. Often are really good at knowing the solutions to problems that might not have necessarily bubbled up in an organisation. So there's lots of ways that I've just touched on to engage consultants outside of reports, big builds, and trusted advisory. There's lots of different models that people who are looking to work with consultants, particularly in those asset heavy industries where they're really looking for something quite tangible. There's lots of different ways that you can work with consultants other than, hey, can you come in and write a report for me?
Absolutely. And I just love those examples that you've provided there. Just show so many different ways to engage the experts and the facilitators and the people who can help you shape what needs to come and who needs to be involved in that. Now, you mentioned AI and automation a few times in our conversation now. Look at, it's really disrupting consulting itself. And how do you see human expertise, particularly the relational intelligence, staying relevant and valuable in this context?
I think it was as early as last week. I think it was Sam Altman, who's quite well known as one of the creators for OpenAI, spoke about that in going forward, there's going to be that the world's going to need plumbers, electricians, neurodiverse people. And what that really speaks to is AI is great at repetitive tasks where, so when we think about things like AI agents, are really good at when you're trying to do something repetitive. Large language models are really good at when you're trying to look for patterns in data that you've already got. The reason I flippantly use the term neurodiverse, as did Sam Altman, is what AI is not necessarily doing is because it's looking at patterns and repetition, it's not looking at abstract thinking. So how do we take this from this and connect to this, or we could just move this to this? What it's those large language models are looking at solving the problem the same way, 100, 200 other organizations have, which isn't great when you're looking for competitive something different to what other organizations have done. So there's two parts. One is the hey recommendation side of things, where bringing more abstract thinking, more systems thinking when we're in that problem solving type space. Then when we move to more of the implementation and adoption, what becomes really quite critical as AI becomes more ubiquitous in organizations is around AI adoption. So things like organizational change management in the context of technology become more and more critical than ever and more complex, because not only are you asking somebody to do something different, there's lots of different attitudes that staff members hold about use of AI. So there's concerns about responsible AI usage. If I use this tool, am I going to be made out of a job? The types of questions that we're about interacting with AI are even heightened than other types of IT transformation projects. And what we're already starting to see is the failures are also there as well. So I've read stats that say 90% of AI projects have failed to be adopted, which is much higher than a standard IT adoption failure rate, which is already insanely high. So we've got high profile examples like Salesforce fired a large proportion of their staff on the assumption that AI was going to be able to automate the work. AI couldn't automate the work. And Lyn, we were touching on what does this mean for boards, is that's been catastrophic for Salesforce. So they've lost market share, their their share price has dropped. It's had a detrimental effect on their reputation. So what we're starting to see is moving beyond that AI hype cycle to realise that AI adoption is even more complex than your typical IT project.
Yeah, I've been amazed at the number of, employee headcount decreases based on this assumption that AI is going to replace it. It's been across the board and it's been major. And you can just see the pain that it's putting organisations in. And from a customer experience point of view, which is our other favourite subject that we share, Erin, is that it's disastrous. I mean, it's so much of it's being driven by the finance teams and by the number crunchers, and it's actually going to really damage once customer experiences are impacted. We know customers have very long memories and they are very quick to jump in these environments. So if that's you and you're thinking about how to diminish your workforce, rather than building your capability and building the impact and the value that you give to your customers, utilising your existing teams and thinking about how you can scale better and improve things rather than just looking better on the page, then, here's a warning to you right here, right now. Look, I love these Business Women Australia roundtable discussions that we're really starting to make a mark in, and the co-design sessions that that you host with us are a real part of the shake-up, improving outcomes and innovation in this space, and particularly the disruption that will ultimately define consulting. It's something that you and I have both, over the years, we've really lamented that there's still this tendency for the big consulting firms to be dropping report bombs on executive teams and boards, and it's about time those landmines were deactivated, and those bombs were, put away. Let's do something that's real. How are roundtable formats? How is it that it's so important for groups of people to come together as equals and use a brain's trust to really drive real change?
I think one of the threads through our conversation today, Lyn, has been thinking about how consultancy is fundamentally changing. Around consulting used to be, and in some practices still, I'm the consultant up here, I know everything, you are the client down here, and here's my report, and I am all seeing, all knowing, the expert in everything. What that format enables us to do is really think about, really changes the power dynamic. So rather than the idea of the consultant being the absolute expert in all things, as it puts everybody in an even playing field, because we might, as a consulting collective, bring all kinds of beautiful skills and experience, but the client is always going to be the expert in their problem space. We don't have the lived experience of what it's like for that client to work in that organisation. And particularly in those asset-intensive type industries, everybody that I talk to are all facing the same challenges. So, you touched on AI. So there's this pervasive narrative of, oh, you've got to do AI, you've got to do digital twins, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. At the same time, particularly asset managers saying, look, I'm struggling to keep the lights on. You keep on cutting my operational budget and expecting these types of inefficiencies without investing in building system capability, people capability, or holding space for process improvement. So the beauty of those kind of those containers that BWA creates is it creates time for senior leaders to appreciate that the challenges that they're experiencing in their organisations are similar and different to others who work in those project-heavy, asset-heavy type organisations in a way that's safe, because it's behind closed doors. It's very different to going to a conference or going to a networking event because it's quite public, whereas those types of conversations enable you to share things where you're comfortable that you might not be able to, and realise that there is shared challenges that are, cross-industry, cross-location, across all different types of things. We're still working with humans, and they all have their different challenges.
Yeah, there's so much to learn from each other around hearing, those insights across industries and sectors. We've another thing that we often, grumble about is surface level networking, and what a waste of time it is when we're so busy in our own lives and managing our own clients' needs and projects, and also trying to make a mark as volunteers across the board with the passion projects that we have. Look, what advice would you give to executives and managers and leaders who really want to build more meaningful professional relationships that are going to help elevate their leadership and their knowledge?
one of the things that I see a lot with leaders, and it's changing over time, is a temptation to always build networks within organisations. So particularly leaders who work in large, complex organisations, the temptation is to build relationships with their peers or managers once removed. What that does is it doesn't bring that diversity of thinking. So yes, it's helpful in terms of progressing day-to-day things through your organization, but by looking outside your organization, it really starts for you to help to realize who is in having serendipitous conversations. I think about not even, like I've talked a lot about asset intensive industries, but you would be amazed. I volunteer a lot in the startup community, for example. The number of things that I take from the networks that I've got in the startup community and bring them back to major corporate organisations. I find it really fascinating when you start to look out of your organisation and out of your profession as well. I think because we might look outside of our organisation, but the temptation is then to only talk to others in our profession. So, whether it's asset managers, project managers, architects, government. So if you're in government, I would encourage you to make networks with people outside of government. If you're in private, make connections with people in government and regulatory spaces so that you have an understanding of the types of challenges. So my invitation is not just to look outside of your organisation, to look outside of your area of specialty. And for someone like myself, there would be an opportunity to join so many different women in groups. Some days I'm a farmer, some days I'm in tech, some days I'm in organisational change management. And so, women in digital, women in this, women in that. I could be a member of so many different groups, but the challenge then becomes it's very, very, very niche, and it's great to be surrounded by that community. But what I love about groups like BWA is it gives you exposure to professionals that you would never have engaged with otherwise, and it really helps you think about solving problems in ways that you never would have thought possible.
Well, I certainly agree, and I think that having you in our community, Erin, is such a gift. Thank you for your time and for your expertise and your knowledge. You certainly do press us to think outside the box, to keep being open to innovating, to be looking at new ways of doing things. You're just a natural disruptor, and I love that. So looking ahead, tell us, what does the future of consulting look like for you and the team at TEC Group, and how can other women leaders position themselves at the forefront of this industry transformation that you've just alluded to?
Consulting is fascinating because it's not one of those spaces where you're just selling a product. I always think that there's a client side and then there's a consultant side. So it's not just ship off a widget and what, is the widget going to be pink? What's the hot new color in consulting, Lyn? Purple, clearly. I also have this in khaki too. So on the client side, what's happening on the client side is looking for, and it sounds quite flippant, good clients. So because it is such a relationship, it's not to say, hey, it's for everyone and we do everything. As you know, Lyn, lots of people say, well, what industry are you in? What is it? What is your specialty? And it's a particular type of client. So it's not to say it's this industry, it's farming, it's construction, it's major projects, it's infrastructure. Someone just pick one. But what it's really about is a particular type of client. So we started the conversation talking about how leadership has changed and management has changed. So for TEC, we want to work with clients who just want to go on and get things done. We don't work, not looking for someone who wants, we joke about innovation, jazz hands, spirit fingers. We're looking for clients who want to build things. They want to build capability. They just want to get on and fix things. So we don't neatly fit into a box. And that's the type of space that we do exceptionally well in. So these great technology consultants, happy to recommend them. And there's lots of great people consultants out there too. Lots of people that we know in the BWA network, some fantastic change managers who I know have been on your podcast. And then you've also got great people who do process improvement. Where we do exceptionally well is with clients who are like, I need a bit of all three. Don't know who to call. I need a bit of all three. They're the types of people that we work with really well. And there's kind of this misconception because, and I know you've worked in larger consultancies, Lyn, is there's an assumption that, well, if this consultancy is really, really big, tens of thousands of people, they must be able to do tech, people, and process all at the same time. But what you would have found in your career, Lyn, is that big consultancies are still organised by silos. So they're still organised by practice. So if you engage, say, a Big Four or a mid-tier consultancy, you're actually still engaging with silos anyway. And I think that's something that people kind of forget. Just because a consultancy is large doesn't mean that they think in that kind of people, process, technology, information point of view. In some ways, because of the way that the remuneration and the organizations are structured, is actually worse, because it's all about how does that work for directors and above. So my invitation on the client side is anyone who's solving complex problems. If it's not just a people, process, or technology problem, it feels like it might be 2, 3 of all of those. They're the types of clients that we love to work with. And on the other side of that is having the right people who can solve in that space. So people who are not tech, process, people. And so what we've been really emphasising, and we must have just been ahead of the curve with our name, is that we're a consulting collective. So there's lots of people who are exploring portfolio. It's becoming increasingly ubiquitous. And what a lot of women who I speak to who get to a point is they have the types of skills that don't lend themselves to flying solo. That was my experience. When I first started out, is the types of skills that I've got are not super niche. So these types of consulting collectives enable people who have something, they want that level of self-direction, which is different to working in an organisation, but they want to design something that works for them. Consulting collectives are a great solution for that. So, fractional expertise, which you touched on, Lyn, working by yourself for a lot of people can be quite isolating as well. So a consulting collective is a great way to have a level of autonomy, but work on complex problems for clients that you wouldn't necessarily be able to solve in solo. And so part of our strategy, knowing that the strength of TEC to attract good clients is to have, is because we needed another startup. We're piloting a startup in our own business as well as part of TEC Group called Capability Nexus. So we've touched on AI and why AI is broken. Shout out to anyone who's recruited recently. My heart goes out to you, particularly if you did Seek ads, because the absolute volume of candidates coming through at the moment, because AI has reduced the barrier for people to apply for jobs, which means as a hiring manager, the number of applications that you're getting is just insane. So I feel for you. So where Capability Nexus came about was for our clients, and we work within this problem space, is resumes are dead. Because they're all generated from AI, cover letters are coming from AI. How do we trust that the people that we work with have the skills and experience that they say they do? So we've spun up Capability Nexus as a way to say, if you're a client, you don't care about all of the different places that someone's worked. You want to know that they're actually capable of solving a problem for you. So what we're building up is a database of trusted advisors who have clear capabilities in particular areas that we're able to demonstrate and validate that they're capable of doing what they say they're doing. And also in terms of team fit. So because the best problems are solved in teams, we're really putting forward people who work well together. So not just a team of specialists who are all going to be experts, but how do we put forward great teams of people who work well with particular clients? My most pertinent example, Lyn, particularly in asset-intensive environments, is to ask clients their position on the F word. We have some clients who absolutely love plain speaking teams, who can drop an F-bomb quite casually because it's a way to build trust with their teams. Whereas we have other clients who, please do not ever swear in front of us. So it's a really real world example of when you do the job, but also can you find people that will fit well in our culture in terms of these embedded models. So
wow.
In short, this is good clients, good people.
You guys are just, you see an opportunity and you build it into your business model. I love it, Erin. There's always something new to talk about. That sounds like a podcast in its own right. Very keen on hearing more about that. We'll certainly unpack today why trusted advisors should not show up with pre-cooked answers. And you've demonstrated why real transformation starts with straight talk, with clarity, with honest conversations, with embedding yourselves inside a client's organisation and working with them along the journey. So how do our listeners get in touch with you and the team at TEC Group, whether they're a client looking for this new model of consulting, of embedded consulting and journeying with them on coming up with solutions, or with people that want to join you as a part of the collective of consultants, or those that might be interested in this new skills database and the skills bank?
Fantastic. Thanks, Lyn. So in terms of getting in contact with us, our website is www.theexchangecollective.com.au. All of our contact details are on there. I'm also active on LinkedIn. So welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. If there's anyone who's interested in Capability Nexus, which is our database for our consulting collective, they're welcome to flick me an email or send me a message on LinkedIn, and I'll send them the details to the system.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Erin. It's always delightful to have you and your amazing brain, the way you look at the world, the way you're constantly disrupting, changing and shaping. It's been wonderful to have you on the show, and I hope we can have you back again soon.
Thanks, Lyn.
And if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking about Business Women Australia, we're focused on developing conscious women leaders across business and community, as you've heard, across sectors, professions, states, all around the nations and even around the world. We've got a few amazing leaders that jump into our virtual member connects once a month from around the world, other states and other countries. So if you really adhere to making a real difference. We'd love you to become a part of our movement. Continue the conversation. Explore our leadership pathways. You'll find more information on our website at businesswomenaustralia.com.au, and I invite you to connect with Erin and with all our leaders. They're all on the directory. Build your community around you and engage further as we grow, and think about the ways that we can really impact the world to make it a better place, whether it's through listening, learning, or leading. I'd love you to have a think about joining our programs, joining our movement. I'm Lyn Hawkins. I'm the founder and National Director of Business Women Australia. You can contact me, lyn@businesswomenaustralia.com.au, or via LinkedIn, or through our website. You can arrange a meeting. I'd love to hear from you and your ideas and how you would like to help lead the change that's needed in the world today. Thanks a lot for listening.
You have been listening to the Business Women Australia podcast show. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode and gained some valuable insights to empower you on your journey. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe to stay updated in our latest episodes. And if you're not already a member of Business Women Australia, what are you waiting for? Head to our website today and join so that you can connect with a thriving community of inspiring women across Australia. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.